Welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Ebune. My papers, made in China. My pen pack, made in Cameroon. My suit, made in Turkey. My shoes, made in America. And my white shirt, made in France. That is simply called international trade, a loose word for the transaction of businesses to enable goods and services to flow freely, passing through a series of mechanisms. And one of them is law. And the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law seems to be the regulator to provide a secured judicial system for the flow of businesses across the world. This month, July, it will be celebrating its 50th anniversary as the organization struggles to live in a new environment quite different from that when it was created in the 1960s. My guest today to answer one simple question: who needs their services? Is a former senior legal official in the French ministries of Energy and Justice and happens to be a former product of Paris 2 University and the famous French School of Magistracy before moving to the United Nations Legal Department as a principal civil servant providing judicial services to the division in charge of maritime law, and happens today to be the 8th Secretary to the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. Renaud Sorieul, welcome to Globe Watch.
Thank you. Okay.
We are well connected to the fact that the World Trade Organization is the global regulator of trade policies across the world, but we hear very little of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. The organization is extremely useless, right?
I would say the World Trade Organization is probably better known because it deals with trade policy, with strong involvement from states. We deal more modestly with, but I would say quite usefully, with a lower level of detail, which is precisely the level you alluded to when you mentioned all the reasons for which international trade has an impact on your everyday life. When you trade from Cameroon with China, with Europe, with the United States, you will be concluding contracts. You will be perhaps in need of legal support. You may have disputes to settle. None of this will be regulated at the individual transaction level or directly by the World Trade Organization. For that you need private law instruments or trade law instruments in the sense we understand them, and that is what UNCITRAL brings you.
Well, you just spoke about the business transactions, which of course must have judicial security, and international trade law, lex mercatoria, meaning the law of merchants on land, and lex maritima, meaning the law for merchants or on the sea. Just take me a walkthrough of your mission statement and put them in context.
Well, we have a very broad mission statement. You should first understand that we are a body of the General Assembly of the United Nations. We're a permanent commission created 50 years ago with a mandate, first of all, to coordinate the work of organizations, and there are many, which are active in providing legal standards in the field of international trade law. That is the illustration, I suppose, of the leadership role expected from the General Assembly of the United Nations. But we are probably better known for producing our own legal standards, that is to say, making law for a variety of business transactions. What, of course, should be understood is that we make law, but these laws do not come into force in and of themselves. So we actually propose legislative models for states or contract models for commercial parties to use if they see their interest in doing so.
One key element of international trade law is maritime legislation. According to a 2007 report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, 17 million barrels of petrol pass daily on the Iranian Strait of Hormuz, which represents at least 40% of all global traded oil, making it one of the most valuable trade routes in the world. How does the international or the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law handle a dispute that can arise from such a disputed trade corridor like the Strait of Hormuz?
We don't. We do not deal with oil trade by way of a standard directly applying to those contracts. We would deal with maritime trade from the standpoint of the liability of carriers and shippers of goods being carried through bills of ladings in international trade. But we do have an impact, or we can have an impact, on oil trade, to answer your question, through the dispute resolution aspects. Now, all contracts of international trade, whether or not regulated by a specific international instrument, generally comprise a dispute settlement clause. And one of our specialties is in the area of dispute resolution with arbitration and conciliation, for which we provide a general framework.
Let's take arbitration in particular, because we are not only dealing here of relations between states, but probably there are other actors involved here, especially multinational companies that have to negotiate some of these deals when it comes to, they may be based in Singapore and they are doing oil drilling based maybe in Caracas, in Saudi America. How do you handle all of that? Arbitration?
I will answer your question about arbitration, but first of all, if I may, it is not only of interest to major multinational companies, as perhaps could be understood from your question.
Oh, well, just an example I was giving.
You know, the small and medium-sized company is a player in international trade today. It could even be argued that a consumer is a player in international trade today, because contracts are concluded, goods are being ordered and shipped across borders at all levels. So we're not dealing only with large companies, but the dispute resolution issues, by and large, are the same everywhere. So we provide, the United Nations provides a general framework through a text which predates UNCITRAL, but UNCITRAL is its guardian and deals with its interpretation, which is the 1958 New York Convention on the Recognition and Enforcement of Foreign Arbitral Awards. Technical term. In short, this is the cornerstone of the arbitration system worldwide, through which decisions rendered by arbitrators are enforceable worldwide.
Since 1966, you have been existing. Most of my viewers know of the legal problems around the world which have been settled by the International Court of Justice, which are, of course, palpable around the world. Most people will identify with that. Can you give me a clear-cutting example of any international trade dispute or involving international law which your commission has served as a solution?
We are not a court. You mentioned the International Court of Justice. This is an international body which deals with disputes between states. There are other international bodies dealing with commercial disputes. For example, the Permanent Court of Arbitration could be mentioned as intervening in a number of disputes involving states and private parties, and there is a myriad of what is called arbitration centers, whose task it is to administer arbitration in various parts of the world.
So in that legal,
we are not an arbitration center.
In that legal mix, what have you done concretely?
Providing the law.
In what sense?
The law, the legal framework. If you want an arbitration,
if I understand you very well, what they call in legal sciences, lege lata, the letter of the law, and lege ferenda, the spirit of the law. What you mean to tell me that you are a legal think tank of the United Nations, providing the legal framework for the various instruments or arbitration centers which handle these disputes? Is that what you mean to tell me?
Legal think tank is a good, it's not a term we generally use, but it's quite acceptable, I would say, yes. Legal think tank for the United Nations, and at the same time, reference for states and for commercial parties when they wish to modernize their legislation. So they would come to us, they would first help us to create the model, create this legislative instrument, which we will later try to turn into positive legislation, the legalata aspect. They will get from us assistance in modernizing their legislation.
Globally, digital market space will hit $2 trillion by 2020. A clear indication that the online business is where the future commerce will take place, and this is probably where you will be intervening. Tell me what kind of streamlining of legislation you are doing today when it comes to e-commerce and e-signatures, which of course are increasingly becoming part of the unavoidable element of the global trade system.
Well, this is one of our specialties, although we're not particularly well known, I suppose, in that area either. We have been dealing with electronic commerce legislation since the late 1980s, which makes us pioneers in this area. The angle through which we have been approaching this was to make sure we provide for the legal interoperability of the various systems, and within each system that we provide an enabling legislation which removes legal obstacles, for example, regarding the form of transactions that may exist in international trade. So wherever there is a form requirement that requires paper or that is generally understood to function in a paper-based environment, we have been trying to provide solutions, legal solutions, through which lawmakers could make electronic commerce happen in a legally secure environment. So we have been providing a rule of, as we call it, functional equivalence between electronic documentation and paper documentation.
Do you have a kind of code of conduct for this e-commerce? As you know, there are so many quacks involved now because it's principally very difficult to create a system of credibility of, let's say, a partner who is based in Hong Kong, and then you are found somewhere around Honduras in Saudi America. How is the system, the legal framework, being done online?
Well, I'm not sure the legal framework is done online, but it applies online. So the difficulty there is to make sure that in Latin America and in Africa, there are no rules that would inadvertently, so to speak, void or affect the legal validity of transactions for the very reason that they are made on the internet. That being said, it is, as I said, we provide enabling legislation, which is, again, a fairly modest aspect of all this. So we are not in the business of regulating the internet, but we are in the model of ensuring that the various legal systems that will be crossed by these flow of informations, electronic information, will talk to each other, understand each other, and not prevent electronic transactions.
Well, you just spoke about all these legal systems that the laws will come across.
Yes.
meet each other. Let me just read to you what The Economist, which is one of UK's most trusted newspaper magazines, wrote a few months ago. America and its former colonial master Britain enjoyed the exorbitant privilege of issuing the world's reserve law. And a global survey by Queen Mary University in London in 2012 of general counsels and legal department heads found that 40% of frequently did business using English law and another 22% American, generally the law of New Yorkshire. No other country's law got a significant share. What they are simply saying is that the English law predominates across the legal channels around the world. How do you sort out with the Napoleonic system, which France, for example, my Cameroonian audience already know the torsos with the Ohada law?
Well, there are many questions that can be derived from this statement. We can look first of all at the communication between civil law and common law, the Anglo-American system and the Napoleonic system, to use your terminology. That is, of course, at the heart of our work. These systems, first of all...
To put the French system in a very nice way, le système jacobin, the Jacobin system.
Well, you may characterize it through as you wish.
Absolutely.
I think the most neutral is the civil law system,
okay,
which actually is currently in force in a majority of countries on the planet. But of course, within the common law world and within the civil law world, there are many variations, and we want to make sure that those systems interact. So this is actually a very good example, because through centuries, if you take sales transactions, for example, or contract law in general, civil law has developed its approach and its tools to deal with the formation and the execution of contractual relationships. Civil law has done the same, developing its own set of tools. First of all, it should be remembered that these tools are intended to resolve exactly the same problems in the English-speaking and in the French-speaking world, and in the many other legal systems that
let me just give you a clear-cutting example. There is a firm, call it General Motors, that wants to do business. That is an American company that wants to do business in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is a predominantly French-speaking country with a French legal system, call it the civil law. And then you have this American company that has a huge background of the common law system. How do you harmonize legal models at the level of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, that there is no commercial clash?
Well, there are several ways to do that. Parties may agree on one law, and there we have nothing to say. If parties, these are generally transactions where parties are free to agree. So if they agree to apply American law, or Swiss law, or British law, or French law, these texts will govern the transaction. At one step below or higher, you may have the question of various laws applying at various ends of the transaction. There, the question will be to decide which of the two conflicting laws apply. There are rules to do that. They are called conflicts of laws. That is something we deal with to some extent, but that is not our main line of business or our main approach. Our main approach is to harmonize the two. So we take the American law, we take the British law in your example, we take the French law or the law of whatever countries may have to apply, and we try to analyze how they work and what they may have in common. To the extent possible, we create a standard which is called substantive law.
One American professor called Sykes, in his latest publication, simply titled Economics of International Trade Law, brings a series of seminar minds across legal systems in the world to produce models that can be exploited. Which one is suitable at where you are working today? The Ricardo model of political economic principles, or the Adam Smith model, or the David Hume model? These are all names you know, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So which one is more applicable in the 21st century where you and I are living? These are models and theories taught about centuries and centuries ago.
Yes, but these are economic models. We generally function within a liberal approach to world trade, and our mandate is to facilitate trade. So we will do whatever it takes, but we don't need those theories.
I'm glad that you said that they are mostly based on liberal economic principles. You are dealing for the whole world. I'm sure that China is not a liberal world. I'm sure that Russia is not part of that liberal world. I'm sure that North Korea is not part of that liberal world. So how do you fuse in other systems that don't belong to this transatlantic way of doing things?
You would be surprised. I will of course not name countries, but I would say that a number of the countries you just mentioned can actually be seen from the standpoint of their legal infrastructure as quite liberal when it comes to international trade transactions. Many countries have realized that it is important to facilitate trade, and facilitating trade, whatever the environment in those countries may be otherwise, facilitating trade requires legal interoperability, requires that legal systems talk to each other.
That gives me an opportunity to go back to the January 8, 1918 speech delivered by then U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, the 14-point speech. And point number 2 basically goes somehow in line with the work you are doing, and I quote, absolute freedom of navigation upon the seas, outside territorial waters alike in peace and in war, except as the seas may be closed in whole or in part by international action for the enforcement of international covenants. What are the major obstacles in realizing that dream today, which is partially the work you are doing? What kind of challenges do you face?
I would say I can quite relate to this quote, and I would say it's important to realize that if the United Nations, coming after the League of Nations, is working in this area, it is because, and you might also refer to Adam Smith. There are quotes from Adam Smith we like to recall in this in this area.
In the famous book, The Wealth of Nations.
That the functioning or the smooth functioning of world trade is important for development and for general peace and stability. And that is the reason why the United Nations, which is primarily a political organization, has an interest in these technical developments we are responsible for, to make sure that the greatest possible number of countries and trading players enjoy a legal framework which is favorable to their commercial activities.
Because why Woodrow Wilson was making this statement in 1918 as part of the package of the war to end all wars?
Yes.
You had his French colleague Georges Clemenceau, his Italian counterpart Vittorio Orlando, his British counterpart David George, who were reasoning contrary from the way he was seeing the world from a more open door policy system. Which are the countries or individuals, if you have been moving around the world, do you see that constitute a major block to the kind of principles and ideas you are advocating at the commission in which you are the Secretary General today?
Well, we are precisely trying to transcend the block approach, and whereas countries may have reasons to oppose each other, they can generally unite around this idea that a workable commercial law framework is good for everyone.
Finally, this July, you are celebrating the 50th anniversary of your creation. What next?
I would say, well, of course, more work, more detailed standards to clarify and deepen the work of UNCITRAL. But I would say our greatest challenge is probably one of education and one of application, or common application and common interpretation of our text. So we are currently placing a lot of emphasis in making these texts better known, as you mentioned, or as can be derived from what you said. These standards are not always as well known as they deserve, not always as well used as they deserve, and not always as commonly interpreted as we think they should be.
The 8th Secretary to the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, Renaud Sorieul, thank you very much indeed for being guest on Global Watch.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.